Well, folks, this is an interesting segue for Healthcare Unfiltered. We'll still talk about healthcare a little bit, but this is a little bit of an interesting thing because we have really not ventured into social topics and things that are in the um, uh, common occurrences on the world stage outside of healthcare. But I really thought about this episode when I had the pleasure of meeting and working with Dr. James Winterman, who is originally from England, and he will tell us a little bit about his background. And we started talking about the passing of the Queen of England and what that actually meant to him individually and possibly to the English or British society. And I learned a lot from talking to him that I thought I need to share this broadly with the listeners and the audience. I think you're going to enjoy knowing a little bit more. And I hope that you like this episode. So, James, first of all, welcome to Healthcare Unfiltered. It is your first time on this podcast. We certainly hope it won't be your last, which means that you have a window of opportunity to play your cards right.
Thank you very much.
But let's start by a little bit of an introduction about you, where you're from, where you grew up, and how you ended up in the US. So tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, I mean, it depends how far back you want to go, but yeah, lived in many countries. So spent 5 years of my life at the very beginning in Singapore, which was quite interesting in the 70s. And then from there, really moved back to the UK and England, Scotland, which is definitely a different country, and we can go into that if you ever want to. And then from there, really England studying, and then I went down the chemistry route. So PhD in biotransformations, enzyme chemistry, and took that quite early on, realized that I enjoy the commercialization of the medicines. I enjoy medicines and science. My strap line in my head is science that helps. I think it's very easy to get caught up in the cleverness of science, but it doesn't mean anything sometimes. But the flip side is it's got to be thoughtful enough that it actually is useful to humanity, and that's where I sort of play. So from that point of view, I left research and went into commercialization with Pfizer and Astellas at different roles all the way through, and ended up in Astellas as SVP of marketing and market access for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So yeah, that's a bit about my background. Why did I join Caris? I don't know whether it was a midlife crisis or COVID. I don't know. But from my perspective, I really thought about what's my true north, and it was coming back to that idea of science that helps. And when you think about that in its purest form, the best way to help a lot of people in life will be through precision medicine, in my belief, for the next decade, making sure people get the right medicines. So that's been my journey so far.
That's great, but you traveled a lot. So you've been to the Middle East, Europe, and everything. How did you end up? Why did you end up in the US?
It's one market I've never worked in. I've obviously visited it, and sometimes some of my roles have been global. So I've been working with a lot of Americans. And I just felt I got to a point in my career where I wanted to work in a different country. And I think, given the state of healthcare globally, I think the US market's the most interesting. And then if you filter that with precision medicine, there is no doubt the US is I would say 5 to 10 years ahead of the rest of the world at the moment in terms of how it's operating. So I wanted to live in the future a bit.
I like it. So you're originally from Scotland?
No, England. But as an Englishman in Scotland, it becomes really quite an interesting dynamic.
So help us understand these dynamics a little bit. Tell us about the United Kingdom, then England, and just maybe 101 for folks who are not familiar with this. And I'll tell you this because I had an opportunity to visit London and also visit Dublin, and they're not big fans of each other. I've noticed that, and I also remember watching some of the games. I think there's a soccer tournament where Ireland, Scotland, England and Wales. They play each other, and I don't know what they call the tournament, but I mean, these could go pretty, they're pretty, people are very passionate about them. Give us some history.
Yeah, so I think if you go back, I would say 14, 1500, there was always fights between the English, the Scottish, the Welsh, and the Irish. The Irish less so, to be honest. So because that was over the sea, but there was always these, ongoing battles as the country grew. And then at a certain point, I don't know the exact history, but I would say around the 1780s, something like that. I think when the Wealth of Nations was signed, the other countries, so particularly Scotland and Wales, came together to form what you would call the United Kingdom. So that's where we're working together as a group, and that's why you see, Great Britain. You've got Great Britain and Ireland, and then you've got the United Kingdom. So Great Britain and Ireland is in effect the, I would say, Scotland, Wales, England coming together. And the idea behind it was they can't keep existing on their own, but you'll certainly see it in the politics now, where I don't know if you've heard of the Scottish National Party. They're still pushing for an independent Scotland. So there was a vote about 3 years ago. I can't remember the exact dates, but about 3 years ago, they took an independent vote and agreed to stay as part of the United Kingdom. A bit like the UK did with Brexit, it was within a year of that. So these dynamics go on, but what that leads to, and you're talking about it and alluding to it there, is when you get to sport, particularly, those local desires, if you like, come to the forefront. You're beating your neighbours. And I think you see that globally everywhere, whether that's a local football team from one side of London versus another, whether you see it, Barcelona versus their local rivals. Certainly you see it with Madrid. I would say you've got Real Madrid and Atletico Madrid. So these local rivalries are always going to be there. And I think they manifest probably the most through sport, quite frankly.
And you're a Tottenham Hotspurs fan. They're doing pretty good this year. We'll see what happens. So just to understand, so the United Kingdom, you've got it encompasses Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England.
So the United Kingdom is, my understanding, and I'm not an exact historian, but you've got Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, and England. Southern Ireland is its own country. They're still part of Brexit.
Got it.
Just the northern part of it. And that's why a lot of the Brexit conversations were particularly pointed around Northern Ireland, because it could lead to where people are shipping from, say, Liverpool at the north end of England all the way over into Northern Ireland, part of the UK. But then what's the process between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland? You, in effect, got a way into Europe without having any regulation. So that's why that's been a very sticky point.
Now, the healthcare system, to your knowledge, is it the same across all of these parts of the UK, or it's Scotland is different, Ireland is different? I mean, like Wales is different.
It's always on two levels. It's always on two levels. So what does that mean? Part of it gets devolved. They call it devolved from to that country. So there'll be an NHS Scotland. However, the majority of the framework is exactly the same. So the majority of the framework is the same, but then there'll be a budget that's slightly devolved, or some expectations that are tailored to that locality, where they can start to work it through whatever needs to happen. So you certainly saw that with COVID, where Scotland would choose maybe slightly different way of interpreting the regulations, but then the majority of the time it was the same, 2 meters apart, don't go out. But then they might say, right, we're going to keep everybody in for the next 3 weeks further than the English, because we're spiking at the moment. So it's certainly devolved some decision making to make it what's right for that locality.
And then it's it's in terms of, you mentioned something about the Scottish wanted to be independent. So,
Mhm.
uh, as a citizen, tell me about the governance. I mean, the prime minister oversees everybody in the UK, right?
Correct. Yes.
And the Scottish wanted to have like get out, that they don't want to, they want to have their own, let's say, prime minister kind of.
Yeah, and they have their own leader at the moment. They have their own leader in Nicola Sturgeon. So it's this constant thing of what do we share and what don't we share? When do we have the decision rights and when do you have the decision rights? And I think that's been going on, honestly, since the 1700s. I mean, you've got to remember back in, I can't even remember, maybe over 1,000 years ago, at 900 AD, they built Hadrian's, no, but even earlier than that, must be because it was Romans. The Romans built Hadrian's Wall. I don't know if you remember that.
Mm-hmm.
That was the Romans, when they came across the Celts, they thought we can't cope with this. So they built a wall to keep them out. Now, you know, yeah. So I think everything's like that the whole time, of they want their own identity and what they relate to. So it's a balance between it. But you know, when you go to those referendums, in the Scottish this time definitely said we want to stay, and I think that's what you'll find most of the time. People would rather be together than separate. I think.
Yeah. Do they enter? I mean, I mean, do they? Is a Scottish, let's say, a Scottish man wants to marry an English woman?
Of course.
No, but I mean, like if some of these folks who are really, really national Scottish, would that be frowned upon? Like, is it that bad in certain sectors or not really?
I don't think that's a. I think that's a global thing. I don't think genuinely, and I think you'll know this. There'll be certain people that are have a view that that person should never be with that person, whatever their background.
Yeah,
And you know, you could say it comes from where they were born, Scotland, England. You could say it comes from, you know, Australia, New Zealand. I don't know. I think
yeah, yeah,
what would I say to that? I think my personal view at the moment is the world needs to think about how it comes together.
yeah. Agreed.
We have a lot more in common than we do different, and we should
A-
be celebrating that.
Agreed. So you visit, usually you go back and forth, and a few times a year. I mean, are you able to do that? Hopefully, you have family there.
Yeah, yeah. My wife and three children are back in the UK. I'm going back, funnily enough, next week. I'm taking a few days off to go back and see them. So I'm
Okay,
really looking forward to that.
great. So what's your, I mean, healthcare wise, you have a lot of family there, friends there, and you obviously have a lot of friends here as well. What is your sense, if you try to assess the healthcare from a citizen, from a consumer standpoint, from a patient level perspective? Do you see folks in the UK satisfied and they look at us as crazy? Do you see folks here are more satisfied and they look at the UK as really not being innovative enough? Just like a neutral assessment, because you bring really interesting perspective, kind of living in both countries.
Yeah, I mean, I think what do I see, having arrived into the US, is this is a very, very individualized system here. And what do I mean by that? Is you all pay your own individual insurance to make sure you've got good care, and you're sort of relatively free to choose who you see and move as you need to throughout the system. But the onus is on the individual patient to care for themselves, and they pay quite a lot on insurance, right? There is no doubt about that. And what that leads to, in my opinion, is you certainly have the direct to patient advertising that you wouldn't see in Europe. That leads to a cost. That leads to a cost of medicines that is, in my opinion, disproportionately high in the US. But then you also have the freedom to get the very best and latest medicines because you're all paying for it as an individual patient in your own right. Then if you go to somewhere like the UK or certain parts of Europe, it's much more of a nationalized system. So the base level that everybody gets, irrespective of your background, irrespective of what you contribute, I would say is probably slightly higher, right? The base level, because your range could be, if you're for example, you know, you might move to the UK from another country and you've got something where you've got a broken leg. For the sake of argument, you're on there for a holiday. You could go to an A&E, an accident emergency department, and the NHS would pay for it. Right?
Interesting.
You wouldn't be paying for it yourself. Right? That would just be part of it. It would be covered and we'd see it that way. So the base level in a certain way is covered. But then when it comes to the new innovative medicines, there's much more of a cost containment than you would ever see in the US.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't always get the new medicines, or if you do, the newer medicines are coming, they would be slower to get to the market. They would certainly be definitely much cheaper. The government would take a role of negotiating that much, much harder and saying, if you want access to this whole market, because in effect the NHS is the market, this is the price, and they'd negotiate, but it would always be a lot lower than the US. So those are the sort of different dynamics, but there's much more of a society caring for each other, and everybody comes together in some of those markets. But then you don't get the innovation and the, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
So you've got policy issues, drug-related issues, you know, in terms of medicine and healthcare. You've got political issues, you know, with Scottish, Welsh, English, and all of that. Where does the royal family fit into all of these things? Like, what do they actually do? And you, as a citizen, how do you view their role or involvement?
It was certainly very, very interesting, because I know when we first spoke about this, it was at ESMO, and it was just in Paris, and it was just at the time the Queen had announced that, well, the Queen didn't announce that she died, but it had been announced that she had died. And I'm no royalist. That doesn't mean I'm against them either. I'm proud that we have them. I think they're certainly, it's a job I certainly wouldn't want to do, and I'd call it a job, right? If you think about King Charles, he's waited 73 years and he's now just got the big job. I mean, he's got a lot of work to do, and most people at 73 want to retire. You know,
but what is that? What is that job? Help people who are
listening. I think help. A lot of the time they would be going around and they would have causes. So I didn't realize this until recently, but Prince Philip was a chief. He really drove a lot of the creation of the World Wildlife Fund. So they take on a role of what some of humanity's needs. Now that can be local to the UK, or it can be sometimes global, as an example, the World Wildlife Fund. What they would do a lot of the time, the Queen, she would go around and she'd open, you know, leisure centres or big causes, or meet people to knight them, or as a head of state when dignitaries come from other countries, so that, you know, they see the UK as a strong, collaborative, open market that people want to work with. So you've deliberately separated policies and politics from running the function of the country. Running the function of the country is too strong, but being a state ambassador that can go to New Zealand and represent the UK, and people think, oh, you know, I want to understand how to work with them. And then the politics are deliberately kept separate. I find personally, as a child that grew up through that, what did I find with the royal family? There's funny things, really. One, people get very excited when something happens because they usually get a bank holiday, right? That's real. Right, that's real. So people were like, brilliant, the Queen's died. Some people will say, I've got a day off, right? So that's a truth. But the other thing is, and I saw this with the Silver Jubilee, the Golden Jubilee, the Platinum, the world is complicated enough at the moment. What the Queen does, or that royal family, is it gives people to come together. So the amount of street parties where you don't think about your background, it doesn't matter. It's about how do we get people together, and people will come together and they'd do cakes, sandwiches. They'd close all the roads, and people would literally be sitting out their houses on the roads having parties and talking to each other all day. So it brings society and communities together, irrespective of the politics. And I think as I've got older, I've realized that that's actually quite powerful. Is, you've got reasons to celebrate and be proud as a country for what you are, and it reduces people's divisions and brings them together. And I yeah, that's what I've seen, and I find that quite. I was in the UK for the Platinum Jubilee, and I had a load of friends sending me videos of what they were doing, and you were going, oh, I'm missing out. I'm actually missing out on getting together with people I want to spend time with. So that's how I see it.
So the Queen or the royal family, as I'm listening to you, and you talk about world peace or trying to be ambassadors. I mean, is that analogous to the Pope? I mean, is that what you're thinking? Is that
Pope comes with a religion? The Pope comes with, no doubt, the Pope comes with a religious tone, right?
Right.
So think of the Queen as a head of state that it brings people together, irrespective of religion, irrespective of politics. It's deliberately separating all of that out and just getting people together. So you don't even think about religion when it's just the Queen's Jubilee and you'd come together.
But I'm still trying. So we're trying, for U.S. citizens who maybe have never been to the U.K. and they just don't know except what they see on TV. The royal family, for some people, are viewed as these rich celebrities.
Yeah,
they have a lot of money, and some people are obsessed by their lifestyle and what they're doing and all of these things.
Yeah.
What you're telling me, though, is there's way more substance into what they actually do. And I'd like you just to elaborate on that a little bit more, because I suspect some folks who are listening to this may not really quite understand the substance of some of the things that they do. And maybe if you can think of examples to illustrate some of these would be very helpful.
So a good example, the Queen would see, or the King now, would see the Prime Minister once a week for an update of affairs. Okay, what's that really about? That's actually like having a mentor with a long memory of all the different politics. I mean, I can't remember how many prime ministers the Queen had seen in her lifetime, but I know it started with Winston Churchill. So if you think about that knowledge, right, the institutional knowledge that she has about, and she'll have seen certain people come in, certain people leave, certain people, whatever it looks like, she's just like this wise person that a new prime minister could just sit and just talk to, and there's no politics behind it. It's just I'm here to help you and support you and maybe give you some sageful thoughts, right? That's one thing they would do. I think, you mentioned like they're rich. There's no doubt they're paid by the state and they have a wealth to them, but it's actually state wealth as opposed to individual, right? They're just born into that. So it gets passed on to the next person. We pay taxes. I'd love to see an analysis, and you never will, whether by having the royal family, you actually gain more tourists and people come to see them. And actually, it's a benefit to the UK, or it's a cost. I don't know. I don't think you'll ever see it. And I think if you ever did, there'd be so many arguments about, well, that's not true, and they would have done that, whatever. So I think that becomes slightly irrelevant. But I know for a fact that the Queen would have to read things every single night and sign things off. And, it's a hard job. I think it's a really hard job. But at the same time, let's not kid ourselves. It's not a bad life either, right? So, what does that look like? Well, you don't have to worry about booking a taxi. You don't have to worry about going and getting your food in. You won't be thinking any of those sort of thoughts. But your life is also not your own. You're living in the very, very public eye of the world every single day. So they don't get that choice. It's not like you suddenly go, oh, I'm going to apply for that job and I really fancy doing it. They're born into it and they don't have any choice. So they see it, as the Queen certainly did, as serving the state and giving all her time and energy to looking after the people as best she could, you know. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not a job I would want to do.
So if there's I mean, there's always conflicts and wars across the
Yeah.
world and the globe, frankly. So she or they, whoever is in charge, they choose which ones they would like to get involved
She
in. I
wouldn't get
mean,
involved. She would not get involved.
no, like to bring peace. I mean, like it's not really taking sides.
Not really, she really wouldn't either. You deliberately anything that where there's she'd quite most of the time you'd see her remove and leave that up to the Prime Minister of the UK at the time. That's the
Okay.
politics behind it. That would be deliberately. No, I'm not. I don't. They might discuss it. They might discuss it in their weekly meetings. But I can tell you one thing: we will never know what gets discussed there.
Yeah. What were you doing when these news broke and you heard about this? And take me through how you felt. I preface that by saying when we had the conversation originally, when me and you discussed this a little bit, I could tell you got a bit emotional.
Yeah,
And I could also tell that there was a true sense of loss that you endured, and I'm not gonna lie, I really was a little bit surprised by that, and it just told me that maybe there's more in-depth things that's really beyond just you. Maybe the British people really all feel the same. And certainly as I looked on TV screens and I saw the number of people who just came in to pay respect, I was just really blown away by this. So take me through, what were you doing when you heard the news? If you can reflect how you felt and why you felt this way, and we'll take it from there.
yeah. I mean, funnily enough, I was at ESMO. We'd just run a round table, and I was in the process of reflecting on that and writing it up and thinking about the implications. And somebody texted me and went, "Oh, I've heard the Queen's died." And I was like, "No, not I can't believe that." So I went onto the news myself, and it was announced that the royal family were going there quickly to Balmoral and all of this sort of stuff. So I probably think, if you ask me to speculate, would be she probably had died by that stage, but the British press was controlling it until they wanted to manage it. I think initially I was a bit surprised because only 2 days before that she had welcomed in the latest Prime Minister. So you're sitting there going, and then it made me reflect of if she was at that death's door, how impressive is that to be able to get out of a deathbed, quite frankly, and welcome and do your duty, right, for the country to welcome a new Prime Minister, which amazed me. Then for me, at my age, there's so many people in the UK that have only ever had one royal monarch, the Queen. And it was suddenly like it made you think about all the things she's done and been important to your childhood and all those different events that you've seen throughout life, like the Olympics where she had a role in that it just left a bit more of a vacuum than I thought. I honestly thought, you could take one lens that goes, she had a good life, and she did, and that was it. She's died. But then at the same time, you're going, that's all I've ever known. And it just felt a bit more, wow, I didn't realize the impact she'd had on my life until she wasn't there. And I think that's probably what you saw in me on those days is like, I'd met her once when I was a kid, about 12 years old.
How did you meet her?
She came to open a pharmaceutical factory. So there was this big pharmaceutical factory and she came to open it. And that's what I mean by their duty. They would be flying around doing that maybe 2 to 3 times a day around the whole of the UK. You imagine doing that every day? It's quite a bizarre thought.
And you
Yes,
were you were there in the pharmaceutical factory. What were you doing? You were 12, you said.
My father was involved in the leading the creation of the factory, so we got invited, and yeah, and that was it. Met her.
When you say that you felt there was a vacuum in your life, can you help me understand what that means? I mean, obviously, it's not like you're interacting with the royal family, but like what? There was a sense of loss, and I'm trying just to get to it because she's not a
I
relative.
suppose
She's
in a world of change, right? The world changes a lot, doesn't it? It's changing a lot. There's a lot of different conflicts. She's been a constant for the British people since 1950, whatever it was. So it felt like that constant that's always been there in the back of your mind suddenly isn't there. And that's oh, hang on a minute, what happened? I didn't, and that's really the reflection that you saw in people, and knowing what she'd done always to try and bring people together. She'd never been divisive. She'd always been trying to take a role of the royal family of bringing people together. And I think that was it was a sort of shock of suddenly she's not there. That person that's been the rock, unbeknownst to a lot of us, just there in your life, wasn't there anymore.
Mhm, mhm. Um, were you, when you saw the funeral and the number of people that went to see her and pay their respect, um, were you surprised? This was probably expected given her stature.
Expected, to be honest. I think it's a statement about her and how long she'd done it. And if you looked in the funeral, the amount of people that came from all over the world to pay their respects, uh, yeah, it's something to be proud of as a British citizen, that she was thought of in that way.
Yeah, yeah. So then what happens? I mean, when the queen dies and died, obviously now it's King Charles.
Mm.
So do you have to change all of the currency? Does
Yeah.
the national anthem changes? Like what? I'm very confused about that. What happens? Like you have to you have to go to the bank and say, give me exchange the money? Like what happens?
Yeah, so the national anthem, and then we'll come to the money. The national anthem is exactly the same national anthem. You just change one word from Queen to King.
Hey,
Done.
come on,
Right.
hold on. The rhyme might change. You gotta like make its rhymes differently.
No, they won't do that. It will just change. It's a national anthem. One word change. Very simple. Uh, but the currency they've already started to design, and they're going to bring out in from January, and they'll just slowly but surely filter that in. Uh, that will be weird. That's a great example of weird, odd. Just make you think, oh crikey, your passports will suddenly say from the Queen to the King. All the currencies will change. The stamps, I know people might not even use stamps anymore, but the stamps were always the Queen's head. Now it will become, King Charles III's head, and they'll have to redesign it. But so it's things like that. You go, oh crikey, that's what I mean by the vacuum. You're suddenly going, that's been the British coin all its life, or the British note, and suddenly it's not going to look like that. You're like, wow.
So tell me a little bit about King Charles. Is he, I mean, growing up in Britain and being there and being from there, knowing a lot of people, is he liked? Like, do people like him? Obviously, it looks like it's very tough shoes to fill. Um, so he's already starting behind the eight ball, I think, because people will always compare him to his mother. So
Yeah.
how, is there a sense whether he is a liked personality, not a liked personality, all that stuff?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is he's been brought up his whole life to become King Charles III. Like all his life, all his education, everything has been bought for that moment. And the monarchy only changes when the existing monarch dies. We've had one case where it wasn't, but that won't change. So that's what I mean by being the rock. Sometimes that whole it will be King Charles III, and unfortunately to say it, until he dies, right? And then it will be obviously William at that point. So I think, is he liked? I think obviously people were very fond of Princess Diana, right, in the world. Everybody knows that. But I also think if you listen to the story behind it, he just wanted to be with the woman he loved, right? And love's powerful, isn't it? I mean, who's to say you should be denied living with the woman you love? Really, I find that, you know, and they were divorced at the time, so I think Diana should be celebrated for what she brought to the world, and I think that's a real tragic accident. But at the same time, King Charles III, he's going to be, we're going to be fond of him. I don't think he'll have the same tenure as the Queen, but I think he's trying to. I mean, I don't know if you watched some of the stuff they had to go through in the week, 2 weeks after the for part of the funeral. He was visibly upset. He's lost his mum. You know, forget what their titles are. He's lost his mum, and we'd all feel upset about that. So, you know, from my point of view, he's now taken on a really tough job at 73. And if I know anything about how I will feel at 73, I know my bones will ache and I'll be tired. So I've got nothing but admiration for him trying to do that and bring people together again.
I mean, the Queen was doing it up to her 90s.
Correct. And he
Yeah.
might have to do that for the next 20 years.
Yeah, yeah. Really interesting perspective. I mean, it's really, really very interesting listening to this. So then after him, obviously, you know, after him is William, and there are some issues between. Isn't William the one who went to Canada, or is it? There's two sons, right? William and
Harry.
And one of them, I thought he like denounced the royal family or something.
Harry has, yeah. Harry's come over. I think he's in West Coast US. I think, might be wrong.
Okay, William is the one who did not leave to the US.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what is the other ones in the royal family? So say let the brothers, the princes, all of these things, are they each one like gets something to do and focuses on that? So if you're, let's say you're Harry right now, you're Prince Harry and Prince William, what do they do? Do they have also the same philanthropic, humanitarian things? That's what they focus on, and they pick and choose what they're interested in?
Yes, I think so. I think you either a paid royal or you're not a paid royal, from what I understand. I know one of the things King Charles is trying to do is reduce that roster of paid royals. So a paid royal is somebody that's going around and opening centres and doing, you know, the speeches and the humanitarian side of things. I think from what I understand, he's trying to reduce that. And I think that's respectful of the taxpayers' money, you know. I think going forward, I think William will be very successful as a king. He's very popular. Him and Kate, they're very popular globally as well as in the UK. And then they've got their own children. So the line of succession's, I think, quite well established, to be honest. I think the other people, it depends whether they're a paid royal or not. And I think what I've understood is he's looking at who should be a paid royal and who shouldn't, and making sure that they're busy and doing what's appropriate with, let's be honest, the taxpayers' money, because that's really what it's about. So yeah, I think the Queen had quite a large royal support going on, and I think he's going to start to bring it back. That's my understanding of events.
James, this has been really very helpful. I really appreciate it. Is there anything that you want to share? Anything else you want to say? To listeners, to folks as they listen to this, although they're going to listen to this, will be a few months since the Queen has died, but I want to make sure that if there's anything I forgot to ask you of relevance, whatever I should have asked you, please assume I asked you and just answer.
Very good. No, I think it's been, you know, an enjoyable conversation from my perspective. I really appreciate you putting this together. I hope it's helped listeners understand a different perspective. It doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just a different perspective. And I'm certainly no royalist, and I'm certainly no expert in it. But I think it's been probably the only time in my life time in my life where a monarch's moved on and it's made you think about things. So hopefully I've conveyed that in a way that's appropriate. So I would just like to say thank you for your time.
And we don't want experts about this. This was really designed to get an actual citizen, just like anybody, and the impact on this. And you've done this beautifully. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Winterman, for coming on Healthcare Unfiltered. Really appreciate your time.
Pleasure. I look forward to speaking to you soon. Thank you.